Hello everyone, Charles Watts here. Welcome back to Inside Arsenal for the second time today. It is now Friday evening or late Friday afternoon, actually, to be technically correct. I hope you're all having a good day and a good start to your weekend, whether you're watching or listening to this around the world. As promised earlier, thought I'd pop back on here and go over some of the big talking points from Mikel Arteta's press conference that he held just a little bit earlier today at London Colney ahead of the game against Aston Villa. Of course, tomorrow I'll be doing my preview show in the morning for that Aston Villa game. So anything you want me to discuss or anything you want to say for that preview show, you know what to do. Get into the comments below. Give me your team selections, your ideal starting lineups, what you think Mikel Arteta should do in certain positions. And I'll pull some of them together as always and get them included in tomorrow's show. But in terms of what Mikel had to say at his press conference, didn't really give too much away in terms of team news. Did speak a little bit more about transfers when asked. Kind of spoke about the Zubimendi links without actually talking about Zubimendi, if you see what I mean, and I'll explain a little bit later as well. Some interesting stuff from him, I thought, on Miles Lewis-Skelly and his emergence in the left-back role. Also got a few comments from Unai Emery ahead of the game. The latest team news from Aston Villa. So let's get started, shall we? And this is what he had to say on Arsenal team news. Not a lot, unfortunately, as always, when it comes to Mikel Arteta. On the injured players, he was actually specifically asked about Calafiori in the question to this. He just said, we have a few decisions to make this afternoon with the medical staff to understand whether they are in the best condition for this game or the next one. Of course, Arsenal next in action against Dynamo Zagreb on Wednesday night in the Champions League. So we'll decide that. So basically saying we're going to make a late decision on, I mean, he says maybe some players who've struggling with a little bit of a knock from the game against Spurs potentially, or Calafiori. Like I said, he was specifically asked about Calafiori in that question. Then asked whether any of the long-term injury casualties are close. He said not so far, which obviously that'll be Bukayo Saka. You'd imagine Tomiyasu, Ben White. Although earlier on in the month, he was asked whether he thought Ben might be able to return before the end of January, and he said yes, but we've not heard any more on that yet. So that's what he had to say on team news. Not too much. Did speak more on transfers, as you can imagine. We're in the transfer window. We know that Arsenal are looking for a forward because of the injuries that they've got. This is what he had to say on the transfer window, on whether he believes that the squad could challenge without any new additions, if they could go on and maintain a title challenge without any new additions. He said, at the moment, we don't have them. We are actively trying to find the best possible solution, but we'll have to wait and see what we can do. On the profile of player that Arsenal are looking for, he said, that's not something I'm going to discuss here. Obviously, we have lost two massive players for us in the front line, and we need some support there. So yeah, that was, I thought, interesting, just the way he said that we need some support there. I think it's very, very clear that he knows full well how important it is that Arsenal do manage to get some business done before the end of the window. He was asked further on in the press conference, this was by Simon at the Standard, he was asked whether it was not a while ago, he said that they wanted some new signings, and Simon asked him if that the wording of that now might have changed from want to need in the transfer market. And he says, the word you mean? Well, obviously we have more necessity now because of what's happened in the last few weeks. That is obvious. On how difficult it is to work in the market when everyone knows that Arsenal now need a forward. I spoke about this in this show this morning, about the sort of challenge facing Arsenal when it comes to negotiations with any club that they potentially go knocking on the door of in the next couple of weeks for one of their strikers. That club are going to know that Arsenal are desperate for a forward, and that's not going to make negotiations easy. It's certainly going to put Arsenal in a weak position going into those negotiations. Mikel said, well, I think that's more of a question for Jason Ito, who's obviously the interim sporting director. I don't know, but I think we have to do what we think is right and what we can do as well. That's it. And it's clear that we'd like to improve the squad, especially with what happened. Can we do it or not? It depends on a lot of factors. So that's what he had to say about the transfer window. From in the time of recording this morning show to recording this one, RB Leipzig have been having their press conference. Marco Rose, the manager there, has been having his press conference ahead of their weekend game. And he was asked about Benjamin Sesko and the possibility of him leaving this month. And he was pretty categoric in his response of that's not something that we are planning for. I mean, along those lines anyway, in terms of what he said. But it was basically, yeah, that's not something that we're planning for. That doesn't necessarily rule it out, obviously. You know, if Arsenal go and offer enough money, it's like, was it Frankfurt? They didn't go into this window expecting to lose Mamouche, but Man City have obviously put an offer on the table that's made it very, very hard to turn down. And ultimately, if Arsenal get in and get one of the players they really want, that might well have to be the sort of direction they take as well when it comes to negotiations. Right, moving on. This is what he had to say. He was asked about Zubimendi in the question. Obviously, this is the quote you can see on the screen there is taken from the Arsenal.com transcript from the press conference. And they obviously don't mention Zubimendi in the question. But he wasn't asked about Zubimendi, but he said, look, Zubimendi's name came up. And then the journalist specifically said, I'm not going to ask you about him, but more about your midfield, the expiring contracts and what that could potentially mean. And he says, we have certain situations with contracts expiring. Jorginho and Thomas Partey means we can renew those contracts like we have done in the past. We are always actively evolving the squad and understanding what the players want to do when they finish our contracts together. And we have to be prepared. That was a key line there, wasn't it? We have to be prepared. I think Arsenal will have a fair idea of what Jorginho and Thomas Partey are thinking. Probably, you would think, at this stage in terms of their contracts and what they might do at the end of this season and what's potentially being offered to them elsewhere and the length of the contracts that might be being offered to them elsewhere. And as Arsenal said, they have to be prepared. I still think the most likely scenario is that both Thomas Partey and Jorginho leave on a free transfer at the end of the season. And if that is the case, then absolutely Arsenal would need to be prepared. And we've seen with this, with the Zubimendi talks and how close that deal is to being done, that they are preparing themselves for a summer where they're going to need to rebuild their midfield a little bit. And you've also got Miles Lewis-Skelly, who could potentially come into that mix as a long-term midfielder. We'll have to wait and see. We'll talk about what Mikel's had to say about Miles Lewis-Skelly in a minute, actually, because there's some interesting comments from him. But yeah, I thought that was quite striking what Mikel had to say about the midfield and Arsenal's need to be prepared when it comes potentially to the summer. Right, let's move on to Miles Lewis-Skelly now. So he's had a brilliant week. Well, he's had a brilliant few months, put it that way, Miles Lewis-Skelly. He's barely put a foot wrong, touch wood. At the moment, he's burst onto the scene at Arsenal. He's playing with maturity and a composure and a control that we just don't often see from 18-year-olds, especially in that sort of defensive position when they're put under a lot of pressure. And he has been put under pressure. He's been put in some really difficult positions. He almost seems to thrive when he gets pressed, Martin Lewis-Skelly. He seems to love it when teams press him. You know, we sit there, and I've done it at times thinking, oh my God, he's in a bad position there. What's he going to do? And then he will just turn out on that press with such composure and suddenly be away. And he was brilliant, obviously, against Spurs. And he's had so many headlines since the Spurs game because of the level of his performance and how impressive he was. And Mikel was asked quite a few questions about him in the press conference today, but I thought this was a really interesting one when he was asked about, this was by Art from The Athletic, was asked about, he asked Mikel, on sort of shifting Lewis-Skelly to the left-back role. And he was asked how much of a role that Arteta himself have played in that. You know, was it the academy thinking? Was it Arteta? Was it a joint type thing? And this is what he had to say. He said, when I saw him, to give him a chance and with the project that we had in the academy, the moment I saw him, the only way I could think was to change his position. I spoke to him and I said, I think this is where you're going to have it, because I think it fits a lot of his qualities, the way that we play, and it fits that we had necessities in the position. So we started to work on that. He got into it straight away with the personality that he has. I think it's very obvious. And now he's doing it. I thought that was really interesting. And sort of Arteta looking at Lewis-Skelly as he was coming through the academy, looking at him when he's training with the first team and thinking, you know what, if you're going to get a real chance here, certainly in the near future, you're probably going to have to do it at left back. And the way Miles has taken to it is absolutely brilliant. He was asked about the progress that Miles Lewis-Skelly has made since pre-season. He says adapting to that role is not just on the defensive part. I think physically, they're very different demands. You're facing wingers a lot of the times in that position. You have to be part of that defensive line. You have to know when to release, when to not. When it's on your side, you have to defend the box, something that he wasn't used to. Then all the attacking processes on top of that. So it's quite a lot. He's dealing with that in a great way. Physically as well, he's matured a lot in the last year. And on Wednesday night, it was another great performance. So interesting stuff, I thought, from Arteta on Lewis Skelly, who I honestly think will keep his place in the team at the weekend. I'd be very, very surprised, even if Ricardo Calafiori is fit, which we don't expect he will be. But even if he is, I think Lewis Skelly right now, he's Arsenal's number one left back. I'm absolutely convinced of that. He's got that shirt. It's his shirt now. It's for Calafiori to win back once Calafiori gets himself back fit, and if he can stay fit, which so far he hasn't been able to do this season. So I think for me, Lewis Skelly is Arsenal's first choice left back, and that's a remarkable thing, really, considering how long he's been playing in that position and where he was just a few months ago. Quickly sort of shifting dynamic from Arsenal's press conference to Aston Villa's press conference. Unai was speaking earlier today at that press conference. He was asked about the win for Villa last season at the Emirates towards the end of the season, April, which is still the last time Arsenal have lost a game in the league at the Emirates. And he was asked how different that is to the game that have got coming up this weekend. He says that it's different circumstances. That moment was a very special circumstance for them and for us because they were involved in the Champions League against Bayern Munich and we were in the Conference League as well. We competed very well in that moment for 90 minutes and we won, but it was very difficult. This year, it's different circumstances. There aren't many things similar to last year. It's going to be different, and we have to try and play competing with the idea that we have. We have to build the team like we are doing and try and get confidence and good feelings. Individual players need to feel confident, and that is the match we have tomorrow. He also spoke about the latest team news. Obviously, they've just signed Donyell Malen, former Arsenal player, of course, and he was asked if he could be a part of matchday squad tomorrow, and Emery said yes, could be. So it looks like Donyell Malen could well make his debut against Arsenal. On other team news for Aston Villa, Emery said Pau Torres is still out. He's not available. John McGinn is starting to train on the field, but not for tomorrow. Ross Barkley is still out. Diego Carlos this morning in the medical report, he's not feeling good, and I think he's not going to be available for tomorrow as well. Hopefully the other players we're going to train now, they can be there. So no Torres, no McGinn, no Barkley. Doesn't look like Diego Carlos will be playing either, but Donyell Malen could well make his debut for Aston Villa. So that's the latest team news from Unai Emery ahead of tomorrow's game. And that's about it from this afternoon's update, the press conference reaction. Thank you very much for tuning in once again, for listening, for watching. And like I said at the start, I'll be back tomorrow to do the preview show ahead of tomorrow night's game against Villa at the Emirates. You want to get involved, give me your team selections, your ideal starting 11s, anything you think Mikel Arteta should be doing or not doing for this game, let me know and I'll pull some of them together and get them included in the preview show. Until then, enjoy your Friday night, everyone, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Goodbye.